Welcome to A Slice with Dice, a podcast exploring the ideas, pressures, and possibilities shaping how we learn, lead, and grow. I'm Alderdice. For over 20 years, my work has lived at the intersection of gifted education, leadership development, and school culture, supporting students as they find their strengths, educators as they stretch their thinking, and schools as they build paths that expand opportunity. Ready to dive in? Here's this week's Slice. There's a particular energy in the air at the start of a new semester. It's never quite the same from one year to the next, but if you listen closely, especially around high school and college seniors, you'll hear a soft hum beneath the excitement. It's a mix of anticipation, anxiety, and something that sounds a little like stage fright. It's that feeling you get when you've reached the top of a roller coaster, but the car hasn't stopped yet. You're strapped in, you're committed, you're aware that something big is coming, but you can't quite see what it is. For generations, we've told young people that this stage of life is about launching. You graduate, you leap, you land. The narrative is clean, well, until you try to live it. The truth is that the transition between school and adulthood has always been messy. Every class of grads, every decade. But in recent years, researchers and writers have given that feeling a name. The Quarterlife crisis. And while the phrase might sound indulgent to anyone who grew up in the Great Depression, fought in Vietnam, or paid 13% interest to buy their first home, it has become a surprisingly useful and compassionate lens for understanding the emotional turbulence that arrives somewhere between 18 and 30. Now, the phrase gained real traction in the early 2000s, but the experience itself has deep roots in literature and pop culture. It's the uncertainty of Benjamin Braddock wandering aimlessly after graduation in The Graduate. It's the weary overachiever in Garden State who has checked every box and somehow still feels numb. It's the sharp, funny, and self-aware protagonist in Nick Hornby novels like High Fidelity and About a Boy who can make you laugh while perfectly describing the exact ache you never told anyone else about. And it even shows up in stories we don't usually label as quarter-life stories. Like when I first read Mark Waid's Superman Birthright in the early 2000s, I assumed I was just revisiting a modern retelling of an iconic origin story. And I revisited that graphic novel again this summer when filmmaker James Gunn noted it as one of his inspirations for the new Superman film. Reading it originally, I saw it through the lens of my own quarter-life crisis, and I still find that particular mapping helpful 2 decades later. The book isn't just about the world's greatest superhero, it's about a young adult trying to figure out who he is when all of the things that used to define him no longer fit. A man with immense power still unsure of his purpose. A gifted kid from a small town who suddenly feels very small in a very big place. Sound familiar? That's the essence of the quarter-life crisis. Not a breakdown, but a period of identity searching. Sometimes with urgency and sometimes with quiet despair. Not because people at this age are incapable, but because the world they're stepping into no longer follows a predictable script. You graduate, but the job market shifts. You land a job, but it feels temporary. You chase a sense of meaning, but no one hands you a map. Earlier generations faced these questions too, but in the 1980s and 90s assumed a relatively straight line between adolescence and adulthood. You picked a major, you found a job, you moved out, you built your life. Now, whether that was good or not, there was a frame. Today, the frame is gone. In its place, we have what The Atlantic describes in a 2024 piece as logistical disorientation paired with existential disorientation. Rent is high, housing is scarce, careers are fluid, relationships are complicated, and you're constantly surrounded by people online who seem to have it all figured out at 23. But spoiler, they haven't. That's why some young adults have begun to reach for alternative forms of achievement. Things that feel concrete, measurable, and self-directed, like training for a marathon. It's in that context the marathon becomes more than a fitness challenge. It's a symbolic attempt to restore agency when the rest of adulthood feels slippery. If you can't mortgage a home or define your 5-year plan, maybe you can at least run 26.2 miles and say, I did that. I finished something. For seniors this semester, particularly those who are away from a diploma and a long list of well-meaning questions about what's next in the coming months, this framing matters. The quarter-life crisis isn't a pathology or a personality flaw, it's a developmental moment. It's the period when you stop being defined by where you go to school, who your teachers are, and what your assignments require, and you start defining yourself by a much more complicated question. What do you want your life to mean? Now, if you're a high school senior right now, you may already feel a quiet pressure building under your excitement. You don't have to call it a quarter-life crisis yet. Maybe it's just a very loud whisper, but when you feel that mix of possibility and dread, I want you to know this. It's normal. You're not broken. Actually, you're growing. If you're a college senior, that whisper might already be a roar. You've lived enough life to realize that success isn't automatic and meaning isn't assigned. Maybe you're at the stage where you're doing what a lot of us do when faced with that uncertainty. Collecting achievements, extra credentials, leadership roles, certifications, marathon medals, side hustles, anything that feels like forward motion. But I think it's worth noting that the quarter-life crisis isn't actually solved by achieving your way out of it. It's resolved little by little as you experiment with identity, discover what matters to you, and accept that an uncertain path is still a legitimate path. A crisis becomes a crossroads when you give yourself permission to build a life based not only on expectations, but also on values. And if you want a blueprint for how that transformation works, you don't need a self-help formula. You might just need to revisit Clark Kent trying to become someone that makes sense of both his roots and his aspirations. Or crack open a Nick Hornby novel where a perfectly imperfect protagonist stumbles into growth without ever once delivering a TED Talk about it. Both remind us that meaning is not something we capture once and for all. It's something we assemble through choices, relationships, risks, and yes, sometimes through failure. So as we begin this new semester, I hope we can offer young adults not just advice, but language. Language that helps them name what they're feeling before they assume they're the only ones feeling it. Language that reframes the fear of not being there yet into curiosity about who they might still become. Language that admits uncertainty, but also points to possibility. Because here's the quiet truth that every one of us eventually learns. The quarter-life crisis isn't a sign you're falling behind. It's a sign you're becoming self-aware. And if that's the beginning of the journey, not the end of it, then this moment right now might be exactly where you're supposed to be. A Slice with Dice is a production of Aldercube. Thanks for making time to reflect with me. If you're finding value in these episodes, I hope you'll subscribe and help spread the word. Until next week, lead boldly, listen closely, and keep pushing forward. I'll see you then.